Sergeant Daniel Cross failed out of flight school in his final week. One training accident, one moment of hesitation, and his dream of becoming an Army helicopter pilot was over. They reassigned him to aviation maintenance, the mechanics who fixed the birds other people got to fly. He spent 5 years watching pilots take off while he stayed on the ground with a wrench in his hand. Nobody knew that Daniel Cross still flew every night in his head, still practiced every maneuvers in simulators when no one was watching, still dreamed in rotor wash and altitude calls, until the day a 3-star general's helicopter went down in hostile territory. The pilot was unconscious, and the only person who could fly them out was the mechanic who'd washed out 5 years ago. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to Acts of Veterans so you never miss these true tales of courage. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? Daniel Cross had wanted to fly helicopters since he was 8 years old. Growing up near Fort Rucker, Alabama, he'd spent his childhood watching Blackhawks cut through the sky, their rotor wash shaking the trees in his backyard. He enlisted at 18, scored high enough on his aptitude tests to qualify for warrant officer flight training, spent 2 years preparing, studying, waiting for his slot. When he finally entered flight school at 21, it felt like his life was beginning. The training was brutal. Academics, simulator hours, flight time with instructors who demanded perfection. Daniel thrived. He understood helicopters instinctively, the way they moved, how they responded. He could feel what the aircraft needed before the instruments told him. His instructors noticed. Cross has natural talent. One wrote in an evaluation, excellent situational awareness, strong mechanical understanding, recommended for advanced training. He was 3 weeks from graduation, 3 weeks from earning his wings, 3 weeks from becoming what he'd always wanted to be. Then came November 12th, a routine training flight. Cross was pilot in command, with an instructor in the co-pilot seat. The mission was simple: navigate to 3 waypoints, perform a tactical landing, return to base. Everything went perfectly until the approach to the second waypoint. Cross was setting up for the landing when he noticed something in his peripheral vision, another helicopter, too close, off the designated flight path. For a split second, he hesitated. Should he abort the approach? Should he continue? The other aircraft wasn't technically in his landing zone, but it was close enough to make him uncertain. In that moment of hesitation, his altitude dropped faster than intended. The helicopter settled hard. Not a crash, not even close, but harder than it should have been. Hard enough that the skids compressed more than regulations allowed. The instructor took the controls. Cross, what happened? I saw the other bird. Got distracted. Lost my altitude awareness. The instructor's face was grim. That's a safety violation. We're returning to base. The review board convened 3 days. Later, they watched the flight recorder data, interviewed the instructor, reviewed Cross's entire training record. Their conclusion: student pilot demonstrated loss of situational awareness and altitude control during a critical phase of flight. While no damage occurred, the incident indicates insufficient judgment under pressure. Recommendation: remove from flight. Training program. Daniel sat in the review room, numb, as they explained their decision. You have talent, Cross, the board president said, but one mistake at the wrong time can kill people. We can't graduate someone who freezes when they see an unexpected variable. Sir, I've completed 97 flights without incident. One moment is all it takes. Decision is final. Daniel's flight school career ended 3 weeks before graduation. They offered him the chance to retrain in another MOS. He chose aviation maintenance. If he couldn't fly, he'd at least stay close to the aircraft. 5 years later, Sergeant Daniel Cross worked the flight line at Forward Operating Base Thunder in Afghanistan. He was a UH-60 Black Hawk mechanic, one of the best on base. He knew every system, every component, every sound a helicopter should and shouldn't make. When pilots reported problems, Daniel found solutions. When aircraft needed emergency repairs, Daniel worked through the night to get them airworthy. He was respected for his technical knowledge, but he was still just a mechanic. The pilots he'd once trained alongside were now flying combat missions. Daniel was on the ground with a toolbox. He'd never talked about flight school. When new pilots asked if he'd ever wanted to fly, he gave vague answers. Thought about it once. Didn't work out. But every night, after the flight line went quiet, Daniel did something nobody knew about. He disabled the security monitoring on the base's flight simulator 2 years earlier. From 2300 to 0000 hours, when everyone else slept, Daniel flew. He practiced every emergency procedure in the manual. Engine failures, hydraulic malfunctions, tail rotor failures, combat landings under fire, night operations with zero visibility. He flew scenarios that most pilots would never encounter, and he flew them until he could execute them perfectly every time, with his eyes closed. It was obsession, or maybe penance. Daniel didn't know anymore. He just knew he couldn't let go of flying, even if the Army had. The mission came together quickly. Lieutenant General Richard Caldwell, a 3-star general overseeing regional operations, needed transport from Fob Thunder to Bagram Air Base for an emergency command briefing. Weather was marginal. Intelligence showed elevated threat levels, but the general's schedule was inflexible. Chief Warrant Officer 3 Mike Peterson got the assignment. He was a senior pilot with over 3,000 flight hours, solid, reliable, exactly who you wanted flying AVIP. CW to Amanda Torres would serve as co-pilot, experienced, sharp, recently returned from a medevac unit where she'd flown some of the most dangerous missions in theater. The crew would include the door gunners and, because the helicopter had been flagged for post-flight maintenance inspection, a mechanic to ride along and assess any issues during flight. That mechanic was Sergeant Daniel Cross. Daniel reported to the flight line at 0530 hours. He'd completed the pre-flight inspection the night before, but he walked around the aircraft again, checking everything twice. Rotor blades, tail rotor, hydraulics, fuel lines, engine mounts. Everything was perfect. Peterson arrived, reviewed the flight plan with Torres, then noticed Daniel by the aircraft. "Cross, you coming along?" "Yes, sir." "Post-flight maintenance check." Peterson nodded. "Grab a seat in back. Should be a smooth ride." At 0600 hours, Lieutenant General Caldwell arrived with his aide, Major Sarah Klein. Caldwell was 54, career infantry, a no-nonsense officer who commanded at every level from platoon to division. He nodded at Peterson, ignored everyone else, and climbed aboard. The helicopter lifted off at 0612 hours. Daniel sat in the back with his clipboard, reviewing maintenance logs, while the aircraft climbed to cruising altitude and turned north. For the first 30 minutes, everything was routine. The flight was smooth, communications clear, weather holding. Then, at 06 for 3 hours, the warning came over the radio. "All aircraft, be advised. Enemy activity reported along Route Falcon. Possible manpads threat. Recommend altitude adjustment or route diversion." Peterson's voice came through the internal comms. "We're going to climb and adjust east." Adding, 10 minutes to flight time. Standard procedure. Avoid known threats. Daniel went back to his maintenance notes. At 0651 hours, the RPG hit. Daniel never saw it coming. Nobody did. The explosion was instantaneous. A flash of white light, deafening noise. The aircraft lurched violently sideways. Shrapnel tore through the cockpit. Sparks, smoke, screaming. Peterson slumped forward against his harness, blood streaming from a head wound. Unconscious or worse. Torres grabbed the controls, trying to stabilize the aircraft, but her left arm was shredded by shrapnel. She screamed in pain, unable to maintain her grip. "I can't hold it. I can't." The helicopter began to spin, losing altitude, fast. General Caldwell's voice cut through the chaos. "Someone get on those controls now." The door gunners were trained on weapons, not flight. Major Klein had no aviation experience. Torres was trying to fly with one arm, her face pale with pain and shock, but the aircraft was dropping too fast. They had maybe 30 seconds before impact. Daniel's hands moved before his mind caught up. He unbuckled, lurched forward against the spinning motion, and grabbed Peterson's shoulder. "Sir, can you hear me?" No response. Peterson was out cold. Daniel looked at Torres. She was barely conscious, holding the cyclic with her good arm, but she had no strength left. "I can't. Someone else has to." Daniel made a decision that defied every regulation, every protocol, every rule that had kept him grounded for 5 years. He pulled Peterson out of the pilot's seat and slid into his place. His hands found the controls. Cyclic dot collective, pedals. The feel of them was like coming home. The helicopter was in a bad spin, nose dropping, altitude bleeding away dangerously. 1,500 feet and falling. Daniel's training came flooding back. Not just from flight school, from 5 years of secret practice, thousands of simulated hours of emergency procedures. He neutralized the spin first, pedals, small corrections, feeling the aircraft respond. The spin stopped, the helicopter steadied, but they were still descending, fast, and the engine sounded wrong. Damage from the explosion, power fluctuating. Daniel scanned the instruments, engine temp, climbing, hydraulic pressure dropping. He had limited time before systems started failing. Mayday, Mayday, this is Hawk 7-2. He called over the radio. We've taken an RPG hit, pilot and co-pilot incapacitated, emergency landing in progress. The response came immediately. Hawk 7-2, identify who's flying that aircraft. Daniel hesitated for half a second. Sergeant Daniel Cross, aviation maintenance, silence, then a different voice. Someone from operations. Cross, did you say maintenance? Are you rated? Negative? I washed out of flight school 5 years ago. Jesus Christ. General Caldwell's voice came from behind him, steady despite the chaos. Sergeant, can you land this aircraft? Daniel didn't take his eyes off the instruments. Yes, sir. But I need everyone quiet. No talking unless it's an emergency. Caldwell didn't hesitate. You heard him. Everyone silent. Daniel focused. The ground was coming up fast. He needed to find a landing zone, clear, flat, away from populated areas where they might take more fire. He spotted a dried riverbed, 300 meters ahead. It would do. He adjusted his approach. The helicopter was sluggish. The damaged hydraulics made every control input harder than it should be. But Daniel had practiced this exact scenario in simulators. Hydraulic failure, emergency landing, no margins, 200 feet, 150, 100. He adjusted collective, managing the descent rate. To fast and they'd hit hard. To slow and the failing engine wouldn't have enough power. 50 feet, 25. He flared the nose slightly, bleeding off forward speed. The riverbed rushed up. The skids touched down hard. Not perfect, but controlled. The helicopter settled with a jolt that compressed the landing gear, but didn't collapse. Daniel immediately began shutting down systems. Fuel, electrical, rotor brake. When the rotor stopped spinning, silence filled the aircraft. Daniel sat there, hands still on the controls, breathing hard. His heart was hammering, adrenaline flooding his system. Behind him, General Caldwell unbuckled and moved forward. Sergeant Cross. Daniel turned. Yes, sir. That was the best emergency landing I've seen in 30 years of flying. Daniel didn't know what to say. Major Klein was already on the radio calling for QRF and medevac. The door gunners were establishing a security perimeter. Torres was conscious, applied pressure to her wounded arm. Peterson stirred, groaning. His head wound was bleeding, but he was alive. Caldwell studied Daniel with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. You said you washed out of flight school. Yes, sir. 5 years ago. Final week. Why? Training accident. Judgment error. They said I froze under pressure. Caldwell looked at the helicopter, at the damage, at the fact that everyone was alive. You didn't freeze today. No, sir. Where did you learn to fly like that? You've been grounded for 5 years. Daniel met the general's eyes. Simulators, sir, every night for 5 years. I never stopped practicing. Caldwell's expression shifted, something between surprise and respect. You've been teaching yourself for 5 years. In secret? Yes, sir. The general was quiet for a long moment. Then he pulled out his satellite phone and made a call. The investigation took 3 weeks. Daniel was grounded again, not as punishment, but as procedure while they reviewed what happened. The flight recorder data, his actions, his unauthorized simulator use, his lack of flight certification. He expected to be court-martialed, or at least kicked out. Instead, he was called to a conference room at Bagram Air Base. General Caldwell was there. So was Colonel James Monroe, the head of Army Aviation for the region, and a warrant officer Daniel recognized from his flight school days. Monroe spoke first. Sergeant Cross, we've completed our investigation. What you did violated numerous regulations. Flying without authorization, impersonating a pilot, unauthorized use of training equipment. Daniel stood at attention. Yes, sir, I understand. However, Monroe continued, you also saved the lives of everyone on that aircraft, including a 3-star general. Your flying was exceptional. Your decision-making under pressure was flawless. He paused. We pulled your original flight school records. Reviewed the incident that got you washed out. One training accident. One moment of hesitation. But 9 of 7 perfect flights before that. Monroe looked at Caldwell, who nodded. Sergeant Cross, the Army made a mistake 5 years ago. One incident shouldn't have ended your career, especially given what you've proven since. Daniel felt something tight and his chest loosened. Sir, we're reinstating you to flight training, Monroe said. Effective immediately. You'll complete the final 3 weeks you missed, and then you'll be assigned to a combat aviation unit where your skills can be properly used. Daniel couldn't speak, couldn't process what he was hearing. General Caldwell stood. Cross, you saved my life. You did it with skills you taught yourself because you refused to accept that one mistake defined you. That's the kind of pilot the Army needs. He extended his hand. Daniel shook it, his voice rough. Thank you, sir. 6 months later, Warrant Officer Daniel Cross stood on the flight line at Fob Thunder, this time wearing a pilot's wings. He completed flight school, graduated at the top of his class, been assigned to a medevac unit where his emergency flying skills were invaluable. New mechanics worked on his helicopter now. Daniel made a point to talk to each one, to learn their names, to thank them for their work, because he knew what it was like to be invisible, to watch others fly while you stayed on the ground. And he knew that sometimes the people others overlook are exactly the ones who save everyone when it matters most. One evening, Chief Warrant Officer Peterson recovered from his injuries, found Daniel in the operations center. Cross, got a minute? Yes, sir. Peterson smiled. I wanted to say thanks, properly. You saved my life, and I wanted to apologize. For what, sir? For all those times I walked past you on the flight line and didn't bother to learn your name. You were just a mechanic to me. I didn't see you. Daniel shook his head. You see me now. That's what matters. Peterson nodded. They're saying you're one of the best natural pilots they've seen in years. That you can feel what an aircraft needs before it happens. I had good teachers, Daniel said, and 5 years to practice. Most people would have given up, would have accepted the failure and moved on. Daniel looked out at the flight line, where helicopters were being prepped for evening missions. I couldn't give up on flying, sir. It's who I am. The Army told me I wasn't good enough, but I knew differently. I just had to prove it. And on the day a general's helicopter went down in hostile territory, with everyone's life hanging in the balance, Daniel Cross had proven exactly who he was. Not a washout, not a mechanic pretending to be something he wasn't. A pilot, one of the best, who never stopped believing in himself even when everyone else did. Moral: one failure doesn't define you. What defines you is what you do after the failure. Keep practicing, keep believing. And when your moment comes in, it will come. You'll be ready to prove everyone wrong, including yourself. If this story moved you, don't forget to show your support. Subscribe to Acts of Veterans for more true tales of courage, sacrifice, and honor. Stories that remind us of the quiet strength carried by those who serve. Tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? We love seeing how far these stories reach. Until next time, stay safe, stay strong, and never forget the heroes among us.